When I graduated from university, I honestly believed life would become easier. For 4 years I studied hard. I attended every lecture, completed every assignment, graduated with excellent grades. And like many students, I thought employers would be fighting to hire me. Reality had other plans. Every job posting seemed to require experience. Entry-level positions wanted 2 years of experience. Junior positions wanted 3. Some internships required experience, which felt like a cruel joke. For months I sent applications, dozens of them, then hundreds. Most companies never replied. Some sent automated rejection emails. A few invited me to interviews only to hire someone with more experience. My savings were disappearing. My student optimism was disappearing even faster. Eventually, I stopped focusing on finding my dream job and started focusing on paying my bills. That's how I ended up working at the supermarket around the corner from my apartment. At first, I told myself it would be temporary. Few weeks, maybe a month, just until something better came along. I had no idea that supermarket would teach me more about people than university ever did. The store itself wasn't particularly large. We had around 30 employees, cashiers, stock clerks, security personnel, department managers, cleaners, delivery workers. Like any workplace, it had its own ecosystem, its own politics, its own heroes, its own troublemakers. My manager Karen had worked there for nearly 15 years. She could spot a shoplifter before they even entered an aisle. Then there was Miguel from security, a former police officer who somehow managed to stay calm, no matter what chaos unfolded around him. And Olivia, one of the senior cashiers, who knew almost every regular customer by name. I started at the registers. Sounded simple. Scan items. Accept payment. Smile. Wish customers a good day. In reality, it was far more complicated, especially when people decided not to pay. During my second week, I caught a teenager hiding energy drinks inside his backpack. When confronted, he looked me directly in the eyes and claimed he had brought them from home. Unfortunately for him, I had watched him take them from the shelf 5 minutes earlier on the security cameras. Another customer attempted to switch price labels. Someone else tried to leave through the entrance carrying unpaid groceries. Every day presented a new surprise. Then there were the difficult customers. The ones who arrived angry and seemed determined to stay that way. The woman who demanded a refund for strawberries she had purchased 2 weeks earlier. The man who blamed me personally for inflation. The customer who screamed because a product was out of stock. I quickly learned something important. People rarely get angry about the thing they're actually angry about. Most of the time, the supermarket was simply where their frustration happened to land. Still, not everyone was difficult. Some customers became familiar faces. Retirees who shopped every morning. Parents stopping by after work. University students buying instant noodles and energy drinks. Over time, I began recognizing them. And they began recognizing me. One of those regular customers was a man named Richard. At least that's what his loyalty card said. He was probably in his late 50s. Always polite. Always patient. Never in a hurry. He usually visited on Thursday evenings and bought almost exactly the same things every week. Coffee. Fresh bread. Fruit. A newspaper. Nothing unusual. Unlike many customers, he actually spoke to employees like human beings. If the line was long, he waited. If someone made a mistake, he smiled. The staff liked him. One evening, after a particularly exhausting shift, he noticed I looked frustrated. "Tough day?" he asked. I laughed. "Is it that obvious?" "A little." I scanned his groceries. Let's just say university didn't prepare me for arguing with people about discount coupons. He smiled. "What did you study?" I told him. His eyebrows rose slightly. Interesting field. Apparently not interesting enough for employers. That made him laugh. For a few minutes we talked while I processed his purchase. Nothing important. Just casual conversation. The kind that helps pass the time. Eventually he paid and left. I didn't think much about it afterward. To me, he was simply another pleasant customer. One of the few people who consistently improved my day. What I didn't know was that this conversation would completely change the direction of my career. And less than a month later, The supermarket job I thought was temporary would become the reason I finally got the opportunity I'd been searching for. The next few weeks were business as usual, which, in supermarket language, meant complete chaos. A freezer malfunctioned and ruined hundreds of dollars worth of products. A customer somehow managed to knock over an entire promotional display of glass bottles. A teenager attempted to leave with 3 expensive steaks hidden inside his jacket. And someone abandoned a shopping cart full of frozen food in the cleaning supplies aisle. I was slowly becoming immune to surprises. At least that's what I thought. Then Richard started appearing more often. Not suspiciously often. Just enough for me to notice. Instead of visiting once a week, he would stop by 2 or 3 times. Sometimes he bought only a bottle of water. Sometimes just a newspaper. One evening Olivia noticed it too. "You know your friend is here." I looked up from my register. "My friend? The gentleman with the coffee?" I laughed. "He's not my friend." Olivia smirked. "Sure." A few minutes later Richard appeared in my line. This time he bought a loaf of bread and nothing else, which somehow felt less believable than buying a full cart of groceries. "Good evening," he said. "Back already?" "I forgot bread." I scanned the item. "You forgot bread for 3 consecutive visits?" That made him laugh. Fair point. We chatted for a few minutes, mostly about work. He seemed genuinely interested in the stories I told. The difficult customers. The funny situations. The endless unpredictability. Unlike most people, he listened carefully, as if he were paying attention to details rather than simply being polite. Then one Saturday afternoon something happened that changed everything. The store was packed. Every register was open. Customers were lined halfway down the aisles. The kind of day where everyone on staff moves faster than normal. I was helping a customer when shouting erupted near the self-checkout area. That wasn't unusual. The unusual part was how loud it became. Miguel from security immediately headed toward the noise. Karen followed. I glanced over and recognized the customer. Everyone did. His name was Derek. He wasn't technically banned from the store, but he was close. Over the previous year he'd caused countless problems. Arguments. Complaints. Aggressive behavior toward staff. Several shoplifting incidents that somehow never resulted in enough evidence to remove him permanently. Today appeared to be another one. Derek was yelling at a 17-year-old employee named Hannah. She looked terrified. I couldn't hear every word, but I heard enough. Apparently a self-checkout machine had flagged an item verification. A routine procedure. Nothing unusual. Yet Derek was acting as though someone had accused him of a serious crime. Customers were beginning to stare. Some were recording with their phones. The situation was escalating rapidly. Karen attempted to calm him down. It didn't work. Miguel stepped closer. That didn't help either. Then Derek pointed directly at Hannah. "You people hire complete idiots." The teenager looked ready to cry. Something about that bothered me. A lot. Maybe because she reminded me of myself during my first week. Maybe because nobody deserves to be treated that way over groceries. Whatever the reason, I walked over. "Sir," I said. He turned toward me. Immediately hostile. "What?" "I need you to lower your voice." That didn't go well. For the next several minutes he redirected all of his anger toward me. Honestly, I preferred that. I've dealt with angry customers before. Hannah hadn't. Eventually Miguel escorted him outside. The situation ended. At least publicly. Later that evening Karen called me into her office. I assumed I'd done something wrong. Instead she smiled. "Good job." "With what?" "Hannah." I shrugged. Anyone would have done the same. Karen laughed. "No." That surprised me. She continued. "Most people avoid conflict. Smart people avoid conflict. Maybe." She leaned back in her chair. "But leaders don't." I wasn't sure what to say to that, so I changed the subject. The conversation ended. Life moved on. Or so I thought. 3 days later Richard appeared again. This time he didn't buy anything. Instead he waited until my shift ended, which immediately felt strange. Not creepy. Just unusual. When I walked outside he approached me. "Do you have a few minutes?" I hesitated. "Depends." He smiled. "Fair answer." Then he handed me a business card. I looked down and froze. The company name printed on the card was instantly recognizable. One of the largest firms in the city, a company I'd applied to months earlier, a company that had rejected me. My eyes moved to his title, Senior Operations Director. I looked back at him. What is this? An opportunity. I genuinely didn't understand. Richard laughed. I've been watching you. That sounded much worse than he intended, because he quickly corrected himself. Professionally. I couldn't help smiling. That's slightly better. He nodded. I've watched how you handle customers. I stayed silent. I've watched how coworkers come to you when problems appear. Still silent. I watched what happened with Hannah. Suddenly everything made sense. The extra visits, the conversations, the questions. None of them had been random. Richard wasn't just shopping. He was observing. Then he said something that completely caught me off guard. We have an opening. I blinked. What? In our operations department. I stared at him. The company that rejected me? We didn't reject you. You literally sent me a rejection email. Richard laughed. Human resources did. That's not better. He smiled. Probably not. Then his expression became serious. Would you be willing to interview again? I looked at the business card, then at him, then back at the card. For months I had been trying to get someone to give me a chance. Now one was standing directly in front of me. The only problem? I had absolutely no idea whether this opportunity was too good to be true. And over the next few weeks I was going to find out. I almost said no. Not because I didn't want the opportunity, because it felt unreal. For months I had been sending applications into what felt like a black hole. Suddenly, a senior director from one of the largest companies in the city was offering me an interview because he'd watched me work in a supermarket. Sounded absurd. Karen practically forced me to go. When I told her about Richard's offer, she stared at me for 5 seconds. Then she said, "If you don't attend that interview, I'm firing you." I laughed. "You can't fire me for that." "No." She nodded. "But I can spend every shift reminding you what a terrible decision you're making." That settled it. A week later, I walked into a glass office building that looked more expensive than my entire apartment complex. Everything felt different. The reception area, the conference rooms, the people in tailored suits moving through the hallways. I felt completely out of place. The interview process lasted nearly a month. 3 separate interviews, a case study, an assessment, a final meeting with department leadership. To my surprise, nobody asked much about university. Instead, they kept asking about the supermarket. Tell us about a difficult customer. Tell us about conflict resolution. Tell us about handling pressure. Tell us about working with different personalities. For the first time in my life, my supermarket job wasn't something I was trying to explain away. It was an advantage. 2 weeks later, Richard called. "We'd like to make you an offer." I nearly dropped my phone. The salary was more than double what I was earning. The benefits were excellent. The role aligned perfectly with what I had studied. For the first time since graduation, I felt like my career was finally starting. Then reality arrived. Because getting the job wasn't the difficult part. Keeping it was. My first day went well enough. People were polite, professional, helpful. But by the second week, I started noticing things. Conversations that stopped when I approached. Certain looks during meetings. Comments that seemed harmless on the surface. One afternoon, I overheard 2 coworkers talking near the break room. "She's the new analyst?" Apparently. I heard she worked in a supermarket. There was a pause. Then laughter. Not cruel laughter. The worst kind. Dismissive laughter. The kind that says someone has already decided your worth. I pretended not to hear. But I did. And unfortunately, it wasn't an isolated incident. A few people seemed genuinely supportive. Others clearly viewed me as an experiment. A curiosity. The girl from the supermarket. One coworker in particular made his opinion obvious. His name was Brandon. He had joined the company straight from a prestigious business school. Smart, confident, ambitious, and completely convinced that I didn't belong there. Every meeting became a competition. Every suggestion I made was questioned. Every mistake received extra attention. If I presented an idea, Brandon demanded evidence. If someone else presented the same idea later, suddenly it was brilliant. First it frustrated me. Then it motivated me. Because there was one thing Brandon didn't understand. Working in a supermarket had prepared me for far worse than office politics. Difficult customers had trained me to stay calm. Angry people had taught me patience. Chaotic shifts had taught me prioritization. Limited resources had taught me problem solving. While some of my colleagues were learning these skills for the first time, I'd already spent a year practicing them every day. 3 months into the job, our department received a major assignment. A company-wide efficiency review. The project affected multiple divisions, multiple managers, multiple budgets. Failure would be highly visible. Success would be even more visible. Naturally, Brandon volunteered immediately. So did I. The department director assigned us to the same team. Neither of us looked particularly happy about it. The project quickly became complicated. Every department believed its processes were essential. Nobody wanted change. Nobody wanted criticism. And nobody wanted outsiders examining their work. Meetings became tense. Data was incomplete. Deadlines were aggressive. One afternoon, after a particularly difficult meeting, Brandon slammed his notebook onto a table. "This is impossible." I looked up. "What is?" "Getting these departments to cooperate." I almost laughed. Because compared to Black Friday at the supermarket? Compared to customers fighting over discounted televisions? Compared to shoplifters, angry parents, and broken cash registers? This felt manageable. Difficult, but manageable. So I started doing what had worked in retail. I talked to people. Not executives. Employees. Team leaders. Administrative staff. The people actually doing the work. Gradually, information started appearing. Problems became visible. Patterns emerged. Solutions became obvious. By the 4th month, our project was ahead of schedule. For the first time, even Brandon seemed impressed. Though he'd never admit it. Then something happened that changed everything. A serious operational failure hit one of the company's largest divisions. A mistake that threatened a major client relationship. Executives were furious. Deadlines were collapsing. And somehow, our project team found itself directly in the middle of the crisis. The next few weeks would become the most important period of my career. And they would determine whether I was truly ready for the opportunity Richard had given me. The crisis began on a Monday morning. Those are usually the worst kinds of crises. Everyone arrives already carrying the problems that accumulated over the weekend, and then a new disaster lands on top of them. At 8:15 a.m., our department received an urgent message from senior leadership. One of the company's largest clients was threatening to terminate a multi-year contract. Not because of pricing, not because of competition, because of repeated operational failures. Deliveries had been delayed. Reports contained inconsistencies. Requests had gone unanswered. Individually, the issues seemed small. Together, they had convinced the client that our company was becoming unreliable. For a business relationship worth millions, that was a serious problem. Within an hour, conference rooms were full. Managers were rushing between meetings. Executives were demanding updates. Every department was trying to determine who was responsible. And that's where things became dangerous. Because when pressure increases, many organizations stop looking for solutions and start looking for someone to blame. I had seen a smaller version of this in the supermarket. Whenever inventory went missing, everyone wanted a culprit before understanding the problem. Whenever customers complained, people often focused on defending themselves instead of fixing the issue. The same thing was happening here, only with much larger consequences. Our project team was asked to investigate. For the next 10 days, we barely went home. We reviewed records, interviewed employees, examined workflows, tracked communications. The deeper we looked, the stranger things became. There wasn't one major failure. There were dozens of small failures. Departments weren't sharing information efficiently. Managers were making assumptions. Teams were using different systems. Critical updates sometimes took days to reach the people who needed them. No single employee had created the crisis. The system itself had. Unfortunately, explaining that to executives isn't always easy. People prefer simple answers. Simple answers usually involve a single person being responsible. Reality is rarely that convenient. One evening, after nearly 12 hours of work, Brandon and I were reviewing data in a conference room. We had spent months competing, months questioning each other's ideas, months trying to prove who was right. Then he surprised me. "You know," he said, looking at a spreadsheet, "I was wrong about you." I looked up. "That's a dangerous thing to admit." He laughed. "I'll survive." Then he became serious. "When you started, I thought Richard hired you because he liked you." I appreciated the honesty, even if it stung a little. "And now?" He leaned back. "Now I think he hired you because you understand people." That wasn't the compliment I expected, but it meant more than any comment about technical skills. Because the truth was simple. Most of our project's success had come from understanding people. Understanding how employees actually worked. Understanding why communication failed. Understanding why teams resisted change. The numbers mattered. But people created the numbers. A week later, our team presented its findings to senior leadership. The meeting lasted almost 4 hours. Executives asked difficult questions, sometimes uncomfortable questions. But for the first time, the conversation focused on solutions instead of blame. At the end of the presentation, the chief operating officer looked around the room. Then he asked a question. "Who led most of this investigation?" I immediately wished he hadn't asked. Because suddenly every eye in the room turned toward me. Richard smiled. "The traitor." I wanted to disappear into my chair. Instead, I answered a few questions, then a few more. Before I realized it, I had spent 20 minutes explaining our recommendations. When the meeting ended, several executives stayed behind to continue the conversation. That had never happened to me before. The following months were busy. Very busy. The company implemented many of our recommendations. Communication improved. Processes became simpler. Several departments were reorganized. The client renewed its contract. The crisis passed. Life slowly returned to normal. Then came another surprise. Almost exactly 1 year after I joined the company, Richard invited me to lunch. That alone made me nervous. People rarely invite you to lunch just to discuss the weather. Halfway through the meal, he finally explained why we were there. A management position had become available. My first thought was that he was asking for recommendations. My second thought was that I wasn't qualified. Then he said my name. I stared at him. "You're serious?" "Very." I laughed. "I've only been here a year. You've accomplished more in 1 year than some people accomplish in 5. That sounded flattering. Also terrifying. Several weeks later, after interviews and evaluations, I accepted the promotion. Not because I believed I knew everything. Because I finally understood something important. Nobody ever knows everything. The best managers aren't the people with all the answers. They're the people willing to learn. The people willing to listen. The people willing to admit when they're wrong. On the day the promotion became official, I received dozens of messages. Congratulations from coworkers. Notes from managers. Even one from Brandon. The message was short. For the record, the supermarket experience was clearly worth more than my business school degree. I laughed so hard that people in the office looked over. That evening on my way home, I stopped at the supermarket. The same one where I'd worked after graduation. The automatic doors opened. Everything looked familiar. The registers. The aisles. The customer service desk. Even some of the employees were still there. Karen spotted me almost immediately. She came around the counter and hugged me. "Look at you." I smiled. "Still employed." Understatement of the year. We spent nearly an hour talking. Before I left, I walked through the store one last time. Past the registers where I dealt with angry customers. Past the entrance where shoplifters argued with security. Past the aisles where I'd spent countless shifts wondering whether my degree would ever matter. Back then I thought that job was a failure. A temporary setback. Something I needed to escape. Now I saw it differently. The supermarket taught me patience. Taught me communication. It taught me conflict resolution. It taught me how to stay calm when people were upset. Most importantly, it taught me how to work with all kinds of people. University gave me knowledge. The supermarket taught me how to use it. And looking back, I honestly don't know if I would have succeeded without both. Sometimes the job you think is delaying your future is actually preparing you for it. You just don't realize it until much later.